The storm had swallowed the Olympic forest whole that night. Trees bent under the weight of rain, and the world felt like it had forgotten light. My headlights carved a narrow tunnel through the dark, throwing silver streaks across wet asphalt. I was heading back from a wildlife shoot, half hoping to catch one last glimpse of a black-tailed deer before the weather worsened. But what I saw instead changed everything. She stood in the middle of the forest road, soaked, trembling, and enormous, her fur slicked flat against a rounded belly. A black bear. And not just any bear, she was pregnant. At first, instinct told me to brake and stay inside the truck. You don't step out when a bear is that close, especially in the rain. But she wasn't acting like a wild bear. She didn't growl or charge, she just stared, her breath visible in the cold air, a deep rumble under her ribs like she was struggling to breathe. There was something strangely human in her stillness, as if she wanted to be seen. The radio crackled. Ranger Olivia's voice came through from the other patrol truck up the road. "Ethan, do you see her? Keep your distance." I hesitated. "She's hurt," I said, squinting through the rain. "And she's pregnant." There was a pause on the line, then her voice came quieter. "You can't save every animal, Ethan." I knew she was right. But that sentence, "can't save every animal," always hits harder when you've failed before. Years ago, I lost a rescued raccoon because I waited too long to act. I promised myself I'd never stand by again. The bear staggered one step, then another, and I saw a dark line near her flank, blood mixed with rainwater. That was enough. I switched off the engine, grabbed the emergency blanket, and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit me like glass shards. Needles of rain slicing across my face. She watched every move I made. My boots sank into mud headlights, humming behind me. I crouched low, keeping my voice steady. "It's okay, girl," I murmured. "You're safe now." For a moment, I thought she'd run. But instead, she lowered her head and let out a sound I'll never forget, a rough, tired exhale halfway between a sigh and a surrender. That sound is what made me take another step. I unrolled the blanket and laid it a few feet from her. She sniffed the fabric, then sank slowly, her massive body shivering as thunder rolled over the hills. In that instant, I realized this wasn't just about rescue. It was about trust, hers and mine. We were both standing in the same storm for different reasons. I ran back to the truck for a thermal top and the emergency kit. The rain made every second slower, every breath harder. When I returned, she hadn't moved, only blinked at me with dark, liquid eyes. I could see now how swollen her belly was. Each breath pushed her ribs against her skin. My wildlife training kicked in. Black bears in this region often den in early winter, but this one hadn't found shelter. Maybe the storm had flooded her den. Maybe she'd been driven out by logging noise. Either way, she'd chosen the road, a dangerous mistake for her, a miracle for me. I tossed the tarp over her, gently trying to keep her dry. She tensed, then relaxed, a low hum vibrating through the air. The sound of rain softened, muffled under the tarp. I could smell her fur, earthy, wild, alive. Olivia's truck pulled up behind mine, lights flashing. She jumped out, coat-soaked eyes sharp. "Ethan, you're out of your mind," she said, voice raised over the wind. "That's a wild animal." I looked at her, at the bear, then back. She's not going to make it if we leave her here. Olivia glanced at the forest, then at the bear's swollen belly. "You think she trusts you?" she asked. I nodded. "No," I said quietly. "I think she wants to." That was enough. Together we unfolded the rescue crate we kept in the truck, meant for injured deer, not bears. But we made it work. It took patience, quiet voices, and a lot of faith. I backed away, slowly opening the crate door. The bear sniffed the air, her body trembling. Rain pooled around her paws. For a full minute, nothing happened. Then she took one slow, deliberate step forward, then another, until her massive shoulders disappeared into the crate. We secured the latch, both of us standing there in disbelief. Olivia exhaled. "You're lucky she didn't eat you." I smiled faintly. She didn't want to hurt anyone. She just wanted to live. As we loaded the crate into the truck, the wind shifted. For the first time that night, the rain eased. The forest went quiet except for the hum of the engine and the rhythmic thump of her breathing inside. That rhythm anchored me. It was proof of life, of a heartbeat strong enough to defy the storm. Driving through the twisting roads back toward the sanctuary, I couldn't stop glancing at the rearview mirror. The top moved slightly with each breath she took. My chest tightened with a strange mix of relief and dread. What if she didn't make it? What if I'd only delayed the inevitable? I'd seen enough rescues turn into losses to know that saving an animal isn't always the same as giving it a future. But something about this bear felt different. Maybe it was the way she'd looked at me, steady, unafraid. Or maybe it was because her vulnerability mirrored something I hadn't wanted to admit, that I'd been feeling lost too. After years of photographing wildlife, I'd started to forget why I began somewhere along the way. Compassion had turned into content. And now, in this soaked, trembling creature, I'd found a reminder. I kept talking softly as I drove. "You're gonna be okay, Luna," I said, giving her a name without even realizing it. "We'll get you to Dr. Harper. She's the best." The name Luna felt right. She had appeared out of darkness, glowing faintly in the storm. By the time we reached the rescue center, dawn was just brushing the treetops. The clouds broke enough to let a streak of gold light cut through the mist. Olivia helped me unload the crate, her earlier frustration replaced with quiet respect. "You really think she'll survive?" she asked. I shrugged. "I think she wants to." Inside the small wildlife bay, the hum of generators mixed with the sharp scent of antiseptic. We set the crate down, and for a long moment, neither of us moved. Then I lifted the top. Luna blinked at the sudden light, her breath heavy but even. She didn't roar, didn't panic, just stared. I whispered again, "It's okay, girl. You're home now." Dr. Harper rushed in, pulling on gloves, already assessing. "Pregnant female midwinter." "That's rare," she murmured. "You did well bringing her in." Her tone was brisk but kind, her eyes already scanning for injuries. Watching the vet work reminded me of why wildlife rescue matters, not because we can control nature, but because we can stand beside it when it falters. Every wild animal carries its own story of survival written in scars and silence. Ours is just a small line in that story. When Dr. Harper confirmed that Luna's pulse was steady, she looked at me and said, "You just gave her a chance." I didn't realize how tightly I'd been gripping my jacket until my knuckles loosened. Outside, the storm finally passed. The world smelled new again, wet earth, pine sap, diesel, and the faint sweetness of life continuing. I leaned against the truck and listened to the forest breathe. Somewhere out there, countless animals were facing the same storms unseen. Luna had just been one of them, one lucky enough to cross my path. Compassion isn't about grand gestures. It's about the small decisions you make when no one's watching. The choice to stop the truck. The choice to care even when it's inconvenient. The choice to believe that a wild creature's trust is worth earning. As I left the rescue center, the clouds opened just enough for the moon to shine through a faint silvery curve above the trees. I smiled at the coincidence. Maybe it wasn't one. Maybe some meetings aren't accidents at all. I started the engine ready to head home, but before I pulled away, I looked back through the clinic window. Luna lay quietly inside the enclosure, eyes half closed, breathing calmly and deeply. For the first time that night, I felt something other than worry. I felt gratitude. The road home was long, winding, and still slick with rain, but the forest looked different now. I caught myself thinking about what came next, the exams, the recovery, the waiting. I didn't know then that Luna's journey was only beginning, or that she would soon bring something none of us expected. As the last of the headlights faded into the trees, I whispered to myself, "Hold on, Luna, we're not done yet." By the time we got Luna into the small wildlife clinic, dawn had turned the forest silver. The storm was still grumbling far off, but inside the rescue bay, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Her breathing was shallow, like each inhale had to be convinced to stay. I remember thinking how strange it felt to hear silence after hours of thunder. Sometimes silence doesn't mean peace. It means you've entered the fragile space between life and loss. Dr. Harper Lewis met us at the door. She was the kind of person who didn't waste a second, voice, calm eyes steady. "Get her on the table," she said, pulling on gloves. Olivia and I heaved the crate inside. The air was thick with disinfectant and the low hum of the generators that powered the incubators. Harper leaned close, stethoscope against Luna's chest, her face tightening with focus. "Heart's strong," she murmured, "but she's dehydrated. And look at that belly she's carrying, heavy." I stood back, useless hands clutching my jacket. It's funny how helpless you feel when the only thing left to do is watch. I wanted to fix something to make her understand she was safe, but this was Harper's arena now. Harper inserted a saline ivor, the line trembling with Luna's faint movements. "She's malnourished," she said, glancing at the charts. "Probably hasn't eaten properly in days, maybe weeks." Olivia frowned. "Do bears even come this close to the road this time of year?" Harper shook her head. "Not unless something pushed her out. Maybe construction noise, flooding, or lack of food." While they worked, I kept whispering from the corner, "You're okay, Luna. Just breathe." It wasn't for her, it was for me. Every time her chest rose, it felt like my own lungs remembered how to work. A few minutes later, Harper lifted her head and motioned me closer. "Look," she said quietly, pressing my hand near the bear's abdomen. "You feel that?" Beneath the thick fur, something stirred to tiny, rhythmic pulses. My throat tightened. "Cubs," Harper said softly. "At least 2, maybe 3. For a moment, all 3 of us just stood there, listening to the steady hum of the monitor. Life inside life. I don't think I'd ever seen anything that made time stop like that. But Harper's face grew serious again. "Ethan, listen," she said. "She's stable for now, but carrying this much weight while undernourished is dangerous. She needs constant care and quiet." She hesitated, lowering her voice. "And we don't have enough space here for that kind of isolation." Olivia looked at me. "You're thinking what I'm thinking?" Harper nodded slowly. "If you're willing to take her, Ethan, temporarily, we can guide you through everything remotely. You've got that cabin near the reserve, right?" I froze. Bringing a pregnant black bear into my world wasn't a small decision. But looking at Luna lying there, her breath shallow, her fur still matted with rain, there wasn't really a decision to make. "Yeah," I said. "I'll make it work." Harper gave a faint smile. "I'll prepare her meds and feeding plan. We'll do a more detailed ultrasound once she's rested." She looked down at Luna's belly again. "If she's lucky, we've got maybe 3 weeks before she gives birth." 3 weeks. It sounded both too long and not long enough. We spent the next few hours stabilizing her slow fluids, warm compresses, quiet voices. At one point, Harper turned off the overhead light and switched to a soft lamp. "Too bright," she murmured. "She needs calm, not panic." The air changed instantly. The hum of the generator softened, the rain outside faded to a hush, and Luna's breathing evened out. Watching her chest rise and fall under that amber light, I thought of every rescue I'd seen fail because someone rushed it. Patience. Harper always said saves more lives than medicine. When Luna finally stirred, she didn't panic. She blinked once, twice, then exhaled through her nose long and steady. It was as if she'd decided to stay. Harper noticed it too. "She's fighting," she whispered. "That's a good sign." Later, while Harper ran blood work, I helped Olivia clean up the bay. She broke the silence. "You've done this before, haven't you?" I nodded. "Once or twice, but never with something this big." Olivia smiled faintly. "You know, most people would have driven past her." I shrugged. Most people don't stop for what they don't understand. That's something I've learned in this line of work. Fear and indifference often look the same from the outside. The difference is what you choose to do next. When Harper came back, she handed me a printout, an ultrasound image still warm from the machine. 3 tiny shapes curled and ghostly against the dark. "Here's your proof," she said with a grin. "She's definitely pregnant." Strong heartbeats. My chest loosened with relief I didn't even know I'd been holding, but Harper's tone shifted. "Ethan, one more thing, you'll need to monitor her temperature constantly. If she gets too cold, she could lose them. If too warm, dehydration could set in again." Bears can be incredibly resilient, but pregnancy makes them fragile. I nodded, taking in every word. I'll set up heaters, insulation, whatever it takes. Harper handed me a list of supplies, goat's milk, protein supplements, and a mix of fruits and high-fat foods. No fish yet, she added, half smiling. She's not ready for your famous fish soup. As we loaded Luna back into the transport crate, I caught myself whispering again, "You're going to be okay." Her ear twitched at the sound of my voice. That small movement, barely anything, felt like a promise. Driving toward my cabin, the sky had shifted from gray to pale blue. The storm had passed, leaving behind the smell of wet cedar and cold air. Luna lay quiet in the back, her breathing steady now. Every bump in the road made me glance at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Halfway up the mountain, Olivia's voice came through the radio again. "You sure you're ready for this?" she asked. "Once you start, there's no halfway." I smiled faintly. "I know, but if I stop now, I'll never start again." It took 3 trips to get everything inside the cabin: medical supplies, food, bedding, heat lamps. I rearranged the furniture, cleared a corner, and lined the floor with thick blankets and straw. I wanted it to smell like the forest, not a clinic. When we opened the crate, Luna hesitated, sniffing the air. Her nose twitched as if testing for danger. I backed away slowly, giving her space. After a long pause, she stepped out. Massive paws sinking into the straw, her head turning toward me, once eyes calm but alert. Then she lay down, exhaling as if the ground finally belonged to her. Olivia whistled softly. "I think she approves." I laughed under my breath. "Yeah, maybe she knows this isn't just shelter. It's home for now." That first night I barely slept. I sat near the door, listening to the soft sounds inside her, breathing the faint rustle of straw, the steady tick of the thermostat. There's something strangely humbling about sharing space with a creature that could destroy you in seconds, yet chooses not to. It reminds you that trust isn't given, it's earned moment by moment. By midnight, the cabin was quiet, except for the occasional creak of wood in the cold. I watched her chest rise and fall, slow and even, and realized she was finally resting without fear. That's when it hit me, the irony of it all. I had come out here to photograph wildlife, to capture stories of the forest, but now I was living inside one. Over the next few days, Harper checked in through video calls. She guided me on feeding schedules, temperature readings, and behavioral signs. I started keeping a small journal, notes on every shift in Luna's posture, every flick of her ear. On the 3rd morning, she actually moved closer when I brought her food, her nose twitching at the scent of apples and oats. There was one moment that sealed it. I was kneeling by the enclosure, replacing her water bowl, when she exhaled softly and lowered her head near the bars. For a second, I froze. Then, without thinking, I whispered, "You're safe, Luna." She blinked once, slow and deliberate. That's the first time I realized she recognized my voice. Looking back, I think that's when the mystery began, the unspoken understanding between 2 beings from different worlds. She wasn't tame, and I wasn't her savior. We were just 2 survivors, learning to breathe again, side by side. That night, as the forest outside wrapped itself in fog, I wrote in my journal, "Trust is quieter than I thought. It doesn't roar, it exhales." I didn't know it then, but these quiet days were only the calm before everything changed. Luna's breathing would soon grow heavier, her instincts stronger, and the forest itself would seem to hold its breath for what was coming next. The first week passed more slowly than winter itself. Outside, the Olympic forest glistened under sheets of mist, but inside the cabin, everything moved in whispers. Every sound, Luna's breathing, the creak of the floorboards, the steady hum of the heater, felt amplified, as if the walls were holding their breath with me. I didn't speak much those days. Words felt too heavy for the kind of silence we were sharing. Luna stayed mostly still, curled in the straw near the far wall. She ate only when I wasn't watching. Every time I came close, she'd lift her head slightly, eyes open but unreadable. It was strange how a look could hold both fear and calm. I started to learn her rhythms, the way she exhaled twice before sleeping, the faint twitch of her ear when she sensed someone entering. The more I observed, the more I realized trust isn't something you earn by trying. It's something you create by being consistent. Each morning, I'd mix her food, apples, oats, and a spoon of honey. Dr. Harper had added fish oil for her coat and a blend of vitamins to strengthen the cubs. When I placed the bowl down, I always said the same thing, "Morning, Luna." Breakfast. At first, it was a habit. Later, it became a ritual. By day 4, she started shifting her weight before I even opened the door, as if she knew what was coming. Animals remember tone before words. Maybe that's why she responded more to the rhythm of my voice than to what I said. I never raised it, never rushed, just steady, low, familiar. And slowly, something began to change. On the 5th day, she took food from the bowl while I was still inside. I stood still, barely breathing. She chewed quietly, pausing once to glance at me. That single glance felt like an entire conversation. "I know you're there, and that's okay." It reminded me of a raccoon I'd rescued years ago, a stubborn little creature named Milo. He bit, scratched, and refused food for 2 days straight. The moment I stopped trying to tame him and simply sat nearby, he crawled into my lap on his own. I'd forgotten that until Luna looked at me that way. The next few days became a rhythm of quiet cooperation. I cleaned her bedding, refilled water, and recorded notes for Dr. Harper. Luna would watch her eyes following each movement, but she never growled or turned away. She was curious, and curiosity is the first sign of comfort. Harper called one evening to check in. "How's she holding up?" she asked through the crackle of the satellite line. "Better," I said. "Eating, sleeping, watching me like I owe her something." Harper laughed softly. "That's good. Black bears are observant. They test you before they trust you." Then her tone shifted. "Listen, Ethan, around this stage, her instincts are sharpening. You'll start to notice nesting behavior. Scratching, rearranging straw. Don't interrupt it. Just let her work." That night I heard her moving long after midnight. The sound wasn't frantic, just deliberate. She dragged pieces of straw and blankets toward the far corner, piling them into a small mound. I watched from the doorway, staying silent. The moonlight caught her fur, turning it the color of ash and silver. She worked for almost an hour, then finally rested her head on the mound. I knew then what Harper meant. Instinct was her guide, and my job was to get out of the way. Still, there were moments of doubt. Once when I came in, carrying her bowl, she stood up suddenly tense. My pulse spiked. For a second, I thought she'd lunge, but she only took a step back, watching testing. I froze, heart hammering. Then she did something I didn't expect. She exhaled long and slow before lying back down. The air seemed to thaw between us. It was in those quiet standoffs that I learned something important. Peace isn't the absence of fear. It's learning to stay gentle even when fear is close. By the second week, she was moving more. Her belly swayed heavily now, her steps slower, deliberate. I'd catch her sniffing the edges of the enclosure, testing the limits. Once she brushed her nose near my hand as I was refilling the water. Not a touch, but close enough that I felt her warmth. I froze, afraid to break the moment. Outside, the forest was waking up early that year. Ravens calling, distant wolf howls echoing through the valley. Every sound seemed to remind Luna where she came from. And maybe it reminded me too. I'd spent years photographing animals like her, always from a distance, always as a witness. Now I was part of the story, not just observing it. On day 10, Olivia stopped by with extra supplies. She stood in the doorway watching Luna stretch under the lamplight. "You two look like old roommates," she said. I laughed. She's quieter than most. Olivia crouched, her voice low. "You realize she's trusting you with her cubs before they're even born, right?" That thought stayed with me all night. There's a strange kind of responsibility that comes with trust from a wild creature. It humbles you. It reminds you that control is an illusion, that kindness, not strength, is what keeps you safe. I started documenting small details for the wildlife archive, her eating patterns, her reactions to light, her preferred resting hours. It wasn't just for data. It was a way to understand her better. Black bears are omnivores, adaptable and intelligent. But what fascinated me most wasn't her biology, it was her personality. She had a calm defiance about her, like she knew she was meant to survive. By the third week, Harper's prediction came true. Luna began nesting more seriously. She gathered leaves, blankets, even bits of straw I thought she'd ignored. Sometimes she'd pause mid-task, her ears twitching toward the forest sounds outside. I'd find her staring through the small window as if remembering something beyond it. Maybe bears miss the wild the way we miss home. Then came the day I realized she'd accepted me fully. I was cleaning near her den when my radio crackled loudly. The sound startled me. I dropped the metal bowl. Luna lifted her head but didn't move. I froze, waiting for a reaction. Instead, she lowered her head again and went back to breathing slow and steady. That was it, the sign I'd been waiting for. She no longer saw me as a threat. That evening, I called Harper again. "She's calm now," I said, "even with noise." Harper's tone softened. "Good. That means she feels safe enough to be vulnerable. You've done your job." I hung up and sat by the door watching the last light fade. The heater clicked softly and Luna's breathing filled the room. I thought about how this trust wasn't just hers, it was mine too. She trusted me to protect her, but I was learning to trust myself again, to believe that empathy wasn't weakness. That night I wrote in my journal, "Patience builds bridges where fear builds walls." Days later, Olivia came by again. She handed me a bag of fresh fruit and asked how Luna was doing. I smiled. "She's nesting, probably planning her own nursery." Olivia chuckled. Better than most first-time parents? But under the humor, we both knew what was coming. Harper had said the final weeks would be critical. Luna's restlessness meant the cubs were close. Any stress, any disruption could be dangerous. That evening, while I adjusted the heat lamp, Luna watched me quietly. I could feel her gaze, not threatening, just aware. The air was still filled only with the faint scent of pine from the open window. She shifted, let out a low rumble, and settled into her den. Something about that sound felt like trust given form. I sat down near the doorway, notebook in hand, but didn't write anything. Some moments don't need to be recorded, they just need to be lived. I thought about how strange this journey had been, finding her on that rain-soaked road, watching her fight for breath, now seeing her ready to bring new life into the world. There's a rhythm to survival, I realized, a quiet, stubborn heartbeat that keeps going no matter how cold the world gets. As the night deepened, I turned off the lights and let the moonlight spill in through the window. Luna shifted once, then stilled completely. Her breathing was slow but steady. I felt the forest outside moving too, the wind in the trees, the soft call of an owl. Everything seemed to whisper the same thing. I didn't know when it would happen, only that it would. And when it did, I wanted to be ready. The days that followed felt like living inside a held breath. Every sound, every flicker of movement seemed to carry meaning. Luna's breathing had changed slower, deeper, with pauses long enough to make me nervous. Harper had warned me that this phase would test patience more than anything. "You'll think something's wrong," she'd said, "but often waiting is the hardest part of healing." Each morning I checked the temperature, cleaned her space, and noted her behavior. She was eating less now, sleeping more. Sometimes she'd stare at the door for minutes, completely still. Her instincts were sharpening. She knew the time was near, and yet the stillness scared me more than any noise could. One evening I sat by the small table, flipping through my notes. Patterns stood out, the same hours of restlessness each night, the same sighs before she shifted positions. It reminded me of the forest itself before a storm, quiet but electric. I called Harper just to hear her calm voice. "She's pacing again," I told her, barely touching her food. Harper didn't sound alarmed. "That's good," she said. "She's preparing. Think of it like a mother arranging her nursery. She's choosing where life will begin." That thought stayed with me. Watching Luna move with such purpose, I realized I was witnessing something ancient, an instinct older than language. It made me think about how every species, no matter how different, shares the same pull toward life. We all prepare for the moments we can't control. But even with that understanding, fear has a way of sneaking in. Around midnight that night, Luna started digging near the far corner of her den, pushing straw with her front paws. The sound echoed softly against the cabin walls. I grabbed my flashlight but didn't step closer. I knew better now. She worked tirelessly for hours, stopping only to catch her breath. Her movements were rhythmic, focused, almost reverent. When she finally lay down in the hollow, she'd made her breathing steadied again. I remember whispering to myself, "You built your own cradle." It was a small miracle watching her transform the ordinary into something sacred. By the next morning, frost had formed on the cabin window. The forest outside was wrapped in silence, and inside, Luna barely moved. I brought her water, speaking softly. "Hey, Luna, just us again." Her ear twitched, and she opened one eye, calm but alert. That tiny gesture felt like reassurance. Harper checked in later through video call. "You're doing great," she said after I showed her the den. "Once she stops eating altogether, it won't be long." I hesitated. How long is not long? Harper smiled faintly. "Could be hours. It could be 3 days. Nature runs on her own clock." 3 days. That became both a hope and a test. On the second night, I woke to the sound of rain. Luna was restless again, shifting in her nest. I watched quietly from my chair, flashlight off. Her breathing grew labored for a moment, then eased. I wanted to help to comfort her somehow, but I knew this part wasn't mine to control. That's something people often forget about wildlife rescue. Sometimes the best help is restraint. I thought of an example Harper once gave during training. She said, "Imagine helping a butterfly out of its cocoon. You mean well, but without the struggle, its wings will never strengthen." Watching Luna, I understood that more clearly than ever. Trust didn't mean interfering. It meant believing she knew what to do. Still, my human heart didn't listen easily. Each time she moaned or shifted, my chest tightened. I kept the phone close, ready to call Harper, but I didn't. I just waited. That waiting taught me something I hadn't expected. Faith isn't about certainty. It's what fills the space when certainty disappears. By dawn, she was calm again. Steam rose from her breath in the cold air. I made myself coffee hands, shaking more from nerves than caffeine. The forest outside was silver with frost, the kind that makes every branch glitter. I opened the window slightly, letting in the crisp air. The smell of pine and soil mixed with the warmth inside it was grounding, like a reminder that this moment belonged to the earth, not me. When Olivia stopped by that afternoon, I must have looked worse than Luna. "You've been up all night again, haven't you?" she asked, setting down a thermos of soup. I laughed weakly. "She keeps me guessing." Olivia crouched by the window, peering in. "She's close. Look at her posture. Protective, but not afraid." That word, protective, stuck with me. Maybe that's what this was about all along. Protecting something without owning it, helping without holding. That night, Luna was quiet again, but something felt different. The air itself seemed heavy, charged. She wasn't pacing anymore. She was conserving energy. The small twitches in her muscles, the way she occasionally stretched, signs of preparation. I wrote in my journal, "When silence deepens, life is getting ready to speak." I must have dozed off in the chair because I woke to a soft grunt. Luna was lying on her side, breathing fast. I sat upright, pulse racing. For a moment, I thought it was happening. But then she stilled again. False alarm. I called Harper, trying not to sound panicked. "She's breathing faster," I said. "It could be soon." Right, Harper's voice came steady as ever. "Ethan, remember, bears know their timing better than we do. Don't rush her process. Keep the lights low, stay nearby, and let her guide you." So I did. Hours passed like slow water. I found myself whispering prayers I didn't even realize I remembered. Not for miracles, just for calm. By the third day, Luna barely moved from her nest. She refused food, even her favorite apples. Her body looked heavier, her breathing deeper. Harper called again to check. "She's in pre-labor," she said. "You might see stretching, twitching, or even small contractions. That's all normal. Once she lies completely still, that's when the real work begins." I nodded, though my hands were shaking. I'd spent years photographing wildlife, witnessing moments of survival from a distance. But this felt sacred in a way a camera could never capture. As night fell, snow began to drift outside, coating the trees in white. The forest grew utterly silent, like even the wind refused to disturb her. I sat by the heater, notebook open but empty. Some moments can't be written down until they pass. Luna's breathing deepened again, rhythmic, almost meditative. I realized she wasn't afraid, she was focused. Every instinct in her body knew what was coming. I whispered, "You're doing fine, Luna. Just breathe." She didn't look at me, but I like to think she heard. Time stretched thin that night. I lost track of hours, lost track of thoughts. It was just me, her, and the faint hum of the heater. There's a kind of peace that comes when you stop trying to predict, when all that's left is presence. Somewhere before dawn, Luna stopped moving entirely. I leaned forward, breath caught. Then faintly, I saw her sides tighten once, twice, and relax. My heart pounded, but I didn't move. Not yet. The air felt suspended, balanced between endings and beginnings. And then, stillness. I sat there, barely daring to blink. Harper's words echoed in my mind. "You'll know when the forest holds its breath." I didn't know it then, but that was the final calm before the miracle. I stayed there till morning, the snow outside glowing faintly in the first light. Luna slept quietly, her breathing slow but steady again. She wasn't weak, she was waiting for the right moment to begin. In that silence, something in me shifted. I realized that maybe this rescue wasn't just hers, it was mine too. Luna was teaching me what patience really meant, not waiting for something to happen, but staying open until it does. I turned off the heater, let the natural cold settle back in, and whispered, "I'll be right here." It began just after 3 in the morning. The world outside was covered in snow, the forest silent except for the slow drip of melting ice from the roof. Inside the cabin, the air felt different, dense, expectant. Luna hadn't moved much for hours, but now her breathing had changed. It came faster, shallow at first, then deep, steady, like the rhythm of a drum I didn't know the beat to. I sat on the floor near the enclosure, a thermos of cold coffee in my hands, afraid to blink. I'd been waiting for this, but now that it was happening, I didn't feel ready. "You never are." The first sound came softly, a low groan from deep in her chest. She shifted her weight claws, scraping straw. The den she'd built, her cradle of leaves and blankets, was exactly where she wanted it. Her instincts knew what to do. I just had to trust that. Dr. Harper's voice echoed in my head from our last call. "If it happens at night, don't intervene unless she's in distress. Bears are solitary mothers. They need silence more than help." So I didn't move. I watched, heart racing, every nerve awake. The air filled with small sounds, her breath a low hum, the faint rustle of straw. Then another sound, softer, sharper, unfamiliar. I leaned forward, not daring to breathe. It came again, a high-pitched squeak, weak but alive. A cub. For a few seconds I couldn't believe it. After all those weeks of fear, of waiting and second-guessing, life had arrived quietly without ceremony. No flash, no thunder, just a soft cry in the dark. Luna turned her head, nudged gently toward the sound. Her body curled protectively around the small bundle. Then came another cry and another. 3 in total. I felt tears sting my eyes, uninvited but welcome. I'd seen births before in the wild, but never this close, never this fragile. It was humbling. I thought of how many times I'd tried to control things in my life, how often I'd mistaken doing something for helping. But Luna had reminded me life doesn't need your permission to begin. Her movements were slow, deliberate. She cleaned each cub, licked their tiny bodies until they stilled. Their cries faded into faint whimpers, replaced by the rhythmic sound of her breathing. I sat frozen, afraid to break the spell. The only light came from the small lamp in the corner, its glow soft and golden. I wanted to capture the moment, to record it for the sanctuary archives, but something inside me stopped my hand. Some things are too sacred for lenses. This wasn't documentation, it was devotion. For hours, Luna didn't move from that position. She stayed curled around them, keeping them warm with her body heat. Now and then she'd adjust slightly, a gentle nudge here, a low hum there. I realized then why the forest was so silent. It wasn't just stillness, it was reverence. Even the wind seemed to pause. I remember whispering, "You did it, Luna," though I doubt she heard me. Or maybe she did. She lifted her head briefly, eyes catching the light for a moment. There was something ancient in that look, calm, knowing, unshakable. I thought of all the things that could have gone wrong the night I found her bleeding by the road. The fear she might not survive the weeks of not knowing if she'd make it. And yet, here she was, proving again what nature always does. Survival is quiet, patient, and deeply stubborn. Around dawn, the forest began to stir again. A raven called in the distance. The first light of morning filtered through the frost on the window. I watched the rays settle on Luna's back, turning her fur into a shimmer of brown and gold. The cubs were barely visible under her arm, but I could see them breathing tiny, fragile, perfect. I finally exhaled. I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath for hours. Harper called right on schedule. "How's our girl?" she asked. I smiled, voice thick. "She's a mother." There was a long pause, then Harper laughed softly. I knew she'd pull through. "How many? 3, I said. "All strong, all alive." Harper's tone softened. "You should be proud, not of saving her, of trusting her." That hit deeper than I expected. It made me realize how often we mistake control for care. Real care is quieter. It's standing close without interfering, believing in the strength of something you can't fully understand. Later that morning, Luna finally shifted enough for me to see them clearly. The cubs were impossibly small. Their fur, still thin eyes sealed shut. One wriggled against her chest, searching for warmth. Luna responded instantly, pulling him closer. The way she moved instinctive tender reminded me that even in the wild, love doesn't need words. Watching her, I thought of something Harper once said during a lecture. Every species has its own language for safety. For bears, it's silence and warmth. That was exactly what filled the cabin now. No noise, no movement, just safety. By midday, I stepped outside for the first time in hours. The snow was melting fast water, dripping from branches like soft applause. The air smelled clean, alive. I closed my eyes and listened to birds waking to the forest stretching after the long night. It felt like the whole mountain was celebrating. Inside, Luna continued to rest. Her body for one fell steady and strong. I wrote in my notebook, "The forest doesn't always roar when it gives life. Sometimes it just whispers." That evening, Olivia stopped by, still in her ranger uniform. She took one look at the enclosure and froze. "She did it." I nodded. "3 cubs." Her eyes softened. "You look exhausted." I laughed quietly. "Worth it." We stood there for a while, just watching. Luna didn't mind us now. She was too focused on her new world. Olivia whispered, "I've seen rescues end a lot of ways, but never like this." "Me neither," I said. "Feels like grace." She nodded. "That's what it is." When Olivia left, I stayed up a while longer, documenting what I could for the sanctuary, records, feeding times, Luna's breathing patterns, signs of recovery. But every few minutes I'd glance back at her, unable to stop smiling. At one point, the smallest cub let out a faint sound, somewhere between a hiccup and a squeak. Luna shifted, placing her paw gently over the others, a gesture that somehow looked both protective and loving. I felt a lump in my throat. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about connection across fear, across instinct, across everything that separates species. That's the thing about witnessing birth. It humbles you. It strips away the illusion of control and reminds you that nature moves according to its own rhythm. I realized that all the worry, the sleepless nights, the careful feeding and watching, they were all steps leading here. And now, my only job was to let the story continue. As night fell again, I turned off the lamp. The cabin glowed faintly from the fire's reflection. Outside, the forest hummed softly under the snow. Inside, there was only the sound of breathing, Luna's deep and steady, the cub's light and quick. I thought about how easily I could have missed all of this if I'd kept driving that night on the forest road. One small decision had changed everything. Sometimes life doesn't offer grand choices, just quiet ones that matter more than we realize. Before I went to sleep, I whispered, "Thank you, Luna." And I meant it not just for surviving, but for reminding me that even in the wildest storms, there's a rhythm of grace working quietly beneath it all. I closed my eyes knowing that the forest for once was at peace. The first morning after the birth, everything felt quieter, lighter. The air in the cabin carried a softness I hadn't felt in months. It wasn't silence, it was the hush that comes after something sacred has happened. Luna was awake, resting her chin on her paw. Her body curved protectively around 3 tiny cubs. I could see their little bellies rise and fall with each breath, their fur thin and pale, almost silver in the morning light. For a long time I didn't move, I just watched. There's something about new life that slows you down without asking permission. The forest outside was still frozen, but inside it felt like spring had arrived early. Harper's voice echoed in my memory. For the first few weeks, she won't leave the den. Don't try to touch the cubs, don't even get too close, just let her teach you how to be patient. And she did. Luna's patience was its own language. She nursed them gently, shifting her weight to keep them warm. When one squeaked, she'd nudge it closer with her nose. The other 2 would quiet instantly, as if her calm settled the whole room. I began writing down everything: feeding times, behavior changes, even the smallest sounds. The cubs cried like tiny birds, high-pitched and constant. At first, then less as they grew stronger. On day 3, I heard one of them make a different sound, a low hum like a kitten's purr. Harper later told me it was a cub's contentment call. I wrote that phrase in my notes and underlined it twice. Luna rarely ate much during those first few days. She relied on her fat reserves exactly as Harper predicted. When I offered food, she sniffed it but stayed focused on her cubs. I didn't insist. I'd learned from her that sometimes care means restraint. Each day had its own rhythm. Morning, checks, feeding, prep, quiet observation. My journal started filling with patterns, how often the cubs nursed, when Luna stretched the moments she seemed to sleep. It wasn't data to me anymore, it was a story unfolding line by line. By the end of the first week, the cubs were stronger. They wriggled more tiny paws, twitching noses, searching for warmth. Luna had stopped trembling when I entered the cabin. She still watched me, but not with suspicion anymore, just awareness, like she'd accepted my presence as part of her world. One afternoon, I saw something I'll never forget. A shaft of sunlight came through the window, landing right beside the den. One cub, the smallest, shifted toward it, stretching a paw into the light. It wobbled, then rolled awkwardly, making Luna lift her head. She gave a soft huff, almost like laughter, then pulled it back under her chest. That small moment felt like the forest itself breathing again. But not every day was calm. On day 8, the smallest cub refused to nurse. I watched him squirm weakly, his movements slowing. Panic rose in me, but I forced myself to stay still. Harper had warned me, "There will be weak ones. You'll want to step in, but trust her first." So I waited. Hours passed. Luna nudged the cub repeatedly, licking his head, pulling him closer. Nothing. My stomach twisted. It's one phone call away from asking Harper if I should intervene. And then just as I picked up the phone, I heard a faint squeak, followed by the sound of nursing. I dropped the phone and laughed out loud, the kind of laugh that comes from pure relief. Luna glanced at me briefly, then returned to her cubs completely unfazed. She'd done what I couldn't, she'd believed in him without panic. That moment taught me more than any manual ever could. Sometimes the most powerful help is quiet faith. As the days stretched into weeks, Luna began eating again. I warmed goat's milk mixed with berries and fish stock. The scent filled the cabin earthy and sweet. The first time she took food from my hand, I froze. She leaned forward, lips brushing my fingers, and took the piece gently. No fear, no tension, just quiet acceptance. Her strength returned slowly. The cubs, now covered in soft black fuzz, grew bolder. They started to crawl in clumsy circles, eyes still closed, searching for her warmth. Each movement seemed to bring her pride. She'd nudge them back when they strayed too far, her patience endless. Olivia stopped by one morning with supplies. She crouched by the window, peering in. "They're so small," she whispered. I nodded, but loud I added, grinning. The smallest cub squeaked just then, as if to prove my point. Olivia smiled. "Do you ever get used to it?" "No," I said, "and I hope I never do." Something is healing about watching life grow from something so fragile. It reminded me how survival isn't always about strength, it's about nurture, about small, steady acts that build resilience. On day 12, I noticed Luna grooming herself for the first time since the birth. Harper told me that it was a good sign she was recovering. Her fur shone again under the light. When she finally stood fully stretching for the first time, I realized how much smaller she looked without the weight of pregnancy. That night, I stayed up recording audio for the sanctuary's archive. The mic picked up everything: the cubs' breathing, Luna's soft hum, the creak of the cabin. Listening through headphones, it sounded like a lullaby written by the forest. As I sat there, I thought about how far we'd come. From that rain-soaked night on the forest road to this 3 cubs alive and healthy. It felt impossible, and yet completely right. By week 3, the cubs began showing personalities. One was bold, constantly trying to crawl over Luna's paw. Another was timid, staying tucked under her chest. The smallest, my favorite, was curious but cautious, always peeking before moving. I named him quietly in my notes. Drift, because he moved like a leaf in slow water. One afternoon while Luna slept, Drift managed to crawl halfway out of the den. I froze, unsure if I should help. Before I could move, Luna stirred. Without opening her eyes, she reached out and drew him back with one gentle swipe. That single motion carried a lesson I'd been chasing all my life. Protection isn't control, it's presence. As the days passed, I noticed changes in myself too. I spoke softer, moved more slowly, breathed more easily. The world outside still spun fast emails, deadlines, the noise of cities far away, but here, everything was measured in heartbeats. On the 21st day, Harper came in person. She examined Luna, checked the cubs, and smiled. "They're perfect," she said. "Strong, healthy, responsive. You've done well." I shook my head. "She did it. I just made coffee and took notes." Harper laughed. "Sometimes that's exactly what they need, someone to hold the space." Before leaving, Harper crouched by the den and whispered something I couldn't hear. Luna's eyes flicked open briefly, then closed again. I didn't ask what she said. Some words aren't meant to be repeated. That evening, the forest outside was alive again. Ravens calling, branches creaking under melting snow. I opened the window to let the air in. Luna lifted her head, sniffed the breeze, then settled again. Maybe she missed the scent of the wild, or maybe she just wanted to remember where she came from. As I watched the cubs curl against her belly, I realized that survival doesn't always roar. Sometimes it hums, steady and small inside a wooden cabin on the edge of the world. The forest had given back what it almost took away. 3 new lives. A mother reborn. And somewhere in that quiet rhythm, a man learning how to believe again. Before turning in for the night, I whispered, "You've got this, Luna." The smallest cub stirred, stretching his paw toward the air as if reaching for something unseen. I smiled. Maybe that's what life is reaching, always reaching. By the time the snow melted from the trees of the Olympic forest, the cubs had tripled in size. They tumbled across the cabin floor like shadows chasing sunlight, curious about everything and afraid of nothing. Luna was no longer thin or fragile. Her strength had returned, her fur full and glossy again. Watching her move now, you'd never guess how close we'd come to losing her that night on the forest road. I'd been dreading this season for weeks. Harper had warned me early on. Once the cubs are weaned, you'll have to start preparing for their release. They don't belong in our world. Ethan, they belong in theirs. I knew she was right, but knowing doesn't make it easier. The first step was weaning them off at direct contact. I stopped staying in the cabin overnight, checking in only during feeding hours. The cubs noticed the change immediately. The boldest one, the one I'd secretly named Drift, would climb onto the wooden divider and look toward the door each time I left. It was both endearing and painful. Harper explained it gently one afternoon while helping me assess their progress. "The hardest part of rescue work isn't saving them," she said. "It's teaching them not to need you." I nodded, though my throat tightened. "Feels unnatural," I admitted. "So does every kind of love," she replied. As spring deepened, Luna began pacing near the door. She'd sniffed the breeze ears, twitching toward the forest sounds outside. It wasn't restlessness, it was memory. She remembered what the wild felt like, and now it was calling her back. Olivia arrived that week with tracking collars and transport crates. "The release site's ready," she said. "About 12 miles from here, deep enough that they won't wander near the roads." I signed the papers mechanically, every letter feeling heavier than the last. We spent days preparing the cubs. They practiced climbing small trees near the enclosure, learning to forage on their own. Luna showed them what berries to eat, how to paw at logs for insects. Watching her teach them was like watching the forest itself take shape again inside her. I didn't have to guide her, she knew. There's something beautiful about instinct. It doesn't argue, it doesn't doubt, it just moves forward. But as the date drew closer, my mind filled with what-ifs. What if they didn't adapt? What if they wandered too close to humans? What if they forgot the sound of the forest? Harper saw the worry in my face. "You've done your part," she told me. "Nature will do the rest." On the morning of the release, fog hugged the valley floor. The drive to the clearing was silent except for the hum of the truck tires. Luna and the cubs were calm inside their crates as if they understood. When we reached the site, the forest opened wide before us. Tall pines, glistening streams, the kind of untouched space that reminds you how small you are. Olivia and Harper moved quickly, unloading equipment, setting up the cameras. I stood beside Luna's crate, my hand resting on the metal bars. "You're going home," I whispered. She shifted slightly, her eyes catching mine for just a second. It wasn't fear or confusion. It was recognition. Harper nodded toward me. "Go ahead, Ethan." I unlatched the door slowly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Luna stepped forward, one deliberate paw after another. The cubs followed her, awkward and unsure, their noses twitching at the strange smells of moss and river water. The forest seemed to be quiet as they emerged, like it knew its own had returned. Luna paused halfway across the clearing and turned back. I don't care what anyone says about animals and emotion, there was meaning in that look. It wasn't goodbye. It was an acknowledgement, a kind of thank you that didn't need words. Then she turned again, her cubs following close behind, disappearing between the trees. The silence afterward felt enormous. I stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where they'd vanished. Olivia placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did good," she said softly. I managed a nod, though my chest ached in ways I couldn't explain. I'd spent months building trust, nurturing life, and now the space felt empty. But emptiness, I realized, isn't always loss. It's proof that something mattered enough to leave a mark. On the drive back, I barely spoke. Harper broke the silence once to say, "You know, the wild has its own rhythm. When we step into it, we borrow time. When we step out, it keeps moving without us. That's what makes it sacred." That night, the cabin felt too quiet. The straw, the bowls, even the scratches on the wall, they all carried echoes of them. I sat at the table and wrote one line in my journal. Letting go is not the end of love. It's the shape love takes when it's done its job. Days passed. I returned to work, edited photos, and answered calls. Life resumed, but something inside me had shifted. Every time I drove through the forest roads, I caught myself looking for movement between the trees. I never saw them, but sometimes just before dusk, I'd hear something, an echo of paws against leaves, distant and rhythmic. Maybe it was imagination, or maybe it was Luna, reminding me she was still out there. 2 weeks later, Olivia sent me tracking data. The collars showed they'd settled near a stream deep in the park. "They're doing great," she said. "Hunting, moving as a family." I read that message 3 times. Relief mixed with pride, and for the first time since the release, I felt light again. That evening, I drove to a ridge overlooking the valley. The sun was setting behind the pines, turning everything gold. I sat there with the sound of the forest all around me. Ravens calling branches, swaying a river, whispering somewhere below. It hit me then how interconnected it all was. Luna's survival wasn't just hers, it was part of a larger story, one that began long before me and would continue long after. I thought back to the night I found her soaked, limping eyes full of exhaustion. If I'd kept driving, none of this would exist. It made me realize how fragile the balance between action and apathy really is. Sometimes a single choice shifts an entire chain of life. Before leaving the ridge, I whispered into the air, "Stay wild, Luna." On the way down, the forest grew darker, but I wasn't afraid. Every rustle felt familiar, every sound alive with memory. That night I wrote again in my journal, "We rescue to return, not to keep." The goal isn't possession, it's freedom. That sentence stayed with me. It became my quiet mantra for every rescue that followed. A few days later, I received one last update. The tracking team had spotted Luna and her cubs near a salmon stream, healthy, alert, thriving. The photo they sent showed her standing by the water's edge, the cubs tumbling nearby. Her fur gleamed in the sunlight, strong and alive. I printed that photo and pinned it to the cabin wall right above the spot where she once slept. It wasn't a reminder of what I'd done. It was a reminder of what nature can do when given a chance. Sometimes when I sit there with a cup of coffee, I imagine her leading those cubs deeper into the forest, showing them where the sweetest berries grow, where the air smells like rain. Maybe one day they'll raise cubs of their own. Maybe their story will become part of the forest's quiet song. The thought brings peace more than sadness, because in the end, love that lets go doesn't vanish. It expands. Weeks passed after Luna's release, but the forest never stopped speaking to me. Every breeze that moved through the pines seemed to carry her rhythm. Steady, patient, alive. I still woke early out of habit, checking the temperature, listening for her breathing, half expecting to hear the soft squeak of cubs from the corner of the cabin. It's strange how silence can hold memory like that. Even when life moves on, certain sounds keep echoing inside you. One morning, Harper called. "We got an update from the tracking collars," she said. "You might want to see this." I drove to the sanctuary, hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than I needed to. Harper met me outside with her tablet. "They've settled here," she said, pointing to the map deep inside the northern valley, miles from any road. "They're thriving." I stared at the screen, smiling. "She made it," I whispered. "They all did." Harper nodded. "She's doing exactly what she was meant to do, raising them wild, teaching them the forest." She paused, looking at me. "You know, that's the thing about rescue work. It's not really about saving lives. It's about restoring balance." Her words sat with me long after I left. Balance. That's what this whole journey had been, a reminder that sometimes the best thing you can do for life is to step back and let it return to its own rhythm. That afternoon, I hiked up to the ridge overlooking the valley, the same ridge where I'd said goodbye. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of cedar and rain. Below me, the trees stretched endlessly and were green. Somewhere down there, Luna and her cubs were part of that landscape now, no longer dependent, no longer confined. Just wild, just free. I sat for a long time thinking about how she'd changed me. I'd gone into this rescue believing I was the helper, the protector. But the truth was, Luna had rescued something in me too, something I hadn't realized I'd lost. Before her, I'd been running on autopilot, filming wildlife for views, chasing stories instead of meaning. But Luna had stripped all that away. She'd reminded me what it meant to show up for life quietly, to witness, not dominate. She'd shown me that care doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in patience, in presence, in the decision to stay even when you can't control the outcome. I remembered one night early in her recovery when I'd been worried she wouldn't make it. I'd stayed awake, heart pounding, waiting for her to breathe again. Back then I thought courage meant acting fast, but I learned it can also mean waiting without giving up hope. That's what Luna taught me, the strength of stillness. A week later, I joined Olivia for a routine forest patrol. She parked near a clearing close to the stream where Luna had been spotted. The place looked untouched, no human tracks, just the pattern of wildlife moving through the undergrowth. "You think we'll see her?" Olivia asked. I shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe she'll just let us know she's here." We walked quietly for almost an hour. The forest was alive with sound ravens, calling water, rushing wind, brushing through fir branches. Then, faintly, I saw movement near the tree line. A dark shape. My heart jumped. Through the leaves, Luna emerged larger than before, her fur glinting in the sunlight. Behind her, 3 small cubs followed, now strong and confident. I froze. She hadn't seen us yet. Olivia whispered, "Is that—" "Yeah," I said. "It's her." Luna sniffed the air, then turned her head slightly in our direction. For one brief second, her eyes met mine. The world seemed to hold its breath again. Then she turned, leading her cubs back into the forest, their shapes fading into the shadows of the trees. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, Olivia broke the silence. "Do you think she remembered you?" I smiled. "I think she remembered trust." On the way back, the forest felt different. Not smaller, not tamer, but kinder. It's easy to think of nature as wild chaos, but moments like that remind you it's also made of grace, of quiet intelligence. Every creature, every movement has purpose. Luna had always known hers. It just took me a while to understand mine. That night back at the cabin, I sat at the table and opened my journal. I flipped through pages filled with notes, feeding schedules, weight logs, timestamps of behaviors. They felt distant now, replaced by something larger than data. I turned to a blank page and wrote, "The forest teaches what the world forgets. Patience, surrender, balance." I thought of how often we humans mistake care for control. How quickly we are to cage what we love in the name of protection. But love isn't about holding, it's about trusting enough to release. Luna had shown me that letting go isn't the end of connection. It's the beginning of respect. The next morning, I recorded a short voice note for the sanctuary archives. "Day 98 since rescue," I said. "Luna and her cubs are thriving in the wild." What started as a rescue became a reminder that compassion doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it's quiet, invisible, and deeply human. I stopped the recording but didn't delete it. Maybe one day someone else would find it and understand that every act of care ripples beyond its moment. Later, as the sun dipped low, I made my way to the forest edge one last time. The air was cool, the ground damp with new growth. I set down a bowl of water and a few berries, a simple gesture of gratitude. I didn't expect her to come back, but part of me hoped she would. The wind rustled softly through the trees. A faint sound echoed from deeper in the woods, maybe a branch breaking, maybe something else. I smiled, deciding not to look. Some goodbyes are best left unseen. Standing there, I realized this story wasn't about rescue or wilderness alone. It was about renewal, how both humans and animals can find their way back to something pure when given time and space. Luna's journey reminded me that healing isn't a straight line. It's circular, like the forest's seasons, like trust itself. The wild doesn't just exist out there in the trees. It exists in us, in the parts that still remember how to listen, how to trust, how to let go. If you've ever had to release something you love, a person, a dream, a moment, know this. Letting go doesn't erase what was built. It sets it free to grow beyond you. That's what Luna did. And that's what we all must do in our own ways. As I walked back toward the cabin, twilight spread through the forest, soft and blue. I turned one last time toward the trees and whispered, "Thank you. Not for the story, not for the video I'd eventually make, but for the reminder that miracles don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they just arrive live quietly among us and then return to the wild where they belong. If you've followed Luna's story until now, maybe there's something in it for you too. Maybe there's a part of your life that's waiting to be trusted again, a part that wants to breathe freely. So before you go, take a moment to ask yourself, what could you release today? Not to lose it, but to let it live. And if this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of the quiet miracles hidden in your own world, don't forget to like this video. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts and subscribe for more stories from the wild. Because sometimes what we learn from animals isn't how different we are, it's how deeply we're the same.